Not many get the opportunity to travel around the world, especially at such a young age. But I've been traveling since my teens. Both my parents travel on the job, and oftentimes they have to leave home for weeks or even months. And this spring break, they told me I'd stay with my grandparents, all the way in Ireland. You'll have a lot of fun. If I had the time, I would have told you tons of adventures I had as a kid. But when do you have time? Promise, right after spring break, we'll spend a weekend all together at home. Promise number 101. I was a little anxious at first. I would be going all by myself, and this was the first time I was visiting my grandparents in Ireland. But as soon as I got off that flight, I saw Grandpa rushing with his arms wide open. "Sonny boy, look at you." "Hey, Grandpa." I hadn't expected the ride from the airport to be so long. We were in the car for about 2 hours until we finally reached home. I stepped out of the car to discover a whole new atmosphere. So different. It was so remote. The nearest neighbor was separated by large plowed fields and hills and mountains in the background for as far as I could see. The place was great, a lifetime opportunity to experience some real nature away from the hustle and bustle of the city life. But after a day or two, things started to get a little dull for me. After all, there wasn't much a teen could do in that village. Not to mention, no internet. There was only one bus that would pass through the village, and it would only pass by twice. One time in the morning and the other in the evening. Luckily, my grandpa introduced me to the neighbors, who lived 10 minutes away, and those 10 minutes went by in crossing the field between their house and ours. That's where I met Eilish. Before long, we started to explore the village together. She took me to caves and ancient ruins. Time was flying. I woke up the next morning to find Eilish waving at me with both her hands from the middle of the field. "I'll take you to the barn today." "What's that?" "You'll see." I had no clue what the barn was, but I was still excited. Ireland was full of surprises. I threw on my sweats and ran my fingers through my hair as I went after Eilish. It was a 30-minute walk until we reached the barn. It was a huge, barren, rocky plateau. The ground was covered with a natural limestone pavement. If it wasn't for the tufts of grass poking out from the cracks between the rocks, the experience would have been unearthly. We explored the area all day. It was only when the sun began to set that we realized we would be late. That's when I climbed up the hill to see the large stone structure below. What is that? It's called the Dolmen. It was 4 large gray rocks, arranged on 4 sides, with the larger, long piece of limestone balanced on top. I thought to myself, it was probably some sort of shelter someone managed to make a long time back. As the sun almost set, The last rays of sunlight seeped through the spaces in the rocks. I could never imagine exploring a place like this all by myself in the US. I walked around the monument the last time when I spotted some strange markings on the side. Someone had scratched a series of lines short and long on the stone. Eilish, take a look at this. I called Eilish only to find her digging at the ground on the other side of the monument. There was a crack on the rocky pavement, filled with mud, weed, and moss. There's something buried here. Together, we dug the mud and grass out of the crack to reveal a small wooden box. Eilish, don't you think we should head home? It's getting dark. We just discovered buried treasure and you want to go home? Who knows what that thing is? Eilish pulled out the wooden box that seemed to be wrapped in rags that were so old it almost became infused with the wood. I watched her peel it off and start banging the box onto the ground to open it. The box broke into pieces, and what came out was a thick, rounded piece of metal that had a locket on the center. Wow, ancient jewelry. This must be worth a fortune. She rubbed the dirt on the bracelet with the corner of her skirt and squeezed her hand inside the bracelet. I don't think it's gonna fit you, Eilish. Eilish didn't bother to listen, and she managed to fit her hand inside. All of a sudden, it became chilly. Fog started to fill the air as the sun had almost set. We stared at the bracelet as the darkness began to send a fear within us. Run. We didn't stop until we reached all the way home. It was almost supper when I reached there. I quickly had my food and went straight to my room. It was sometime in the middle of the night. I heard my grandmother come out of her room. Who was making all that noise at this time of the night? It wasn't long before I realized what she was talking about. I heard the screams. It seemed to be coming from somewhere outside. As it got louder, my grandmother hurried to my grandfather. I saw him heading to the phone. He tried to call someone, but after a while his face became pale. I stood just enough to see what was going on. I think the noise is coming from the Petersons' house, but they aren't answering the phone. He turned as he noticed I was watching. What were you and Eilish up to today? My grandfather eyed me suspiciously. Nothing. We just went over to the barn, that's all. What were you guys doing there? Quick, I want to know the truth. Things seemed so intense. I decided to say the truth. We were walking around the Dolmen when we found a box buried there, and Eilish broke it open. My grandfather exchanged a worried look with my grandmother. What did you find inside? There was a bracelet, and Eilish wore it. After that, we both came back home. My grandfather pounded the table next to him. Come on, we have to go check on them. I'm getting a bad feeling. All of us hurried down the field. The screaming had stopped, and everything was eerily silent. We paced down the field. All I could hear now was the crunch of the dry grass under my shoes and the chirping of the crickets. When we reached Eilish's house, we found the door open and entered inside. I held my breath from the stench that filled the air. The telephone was on the floor. It was ripped out of the wall. As we crossed the hallway into the living room, I caught a glimpse of Eilish. She was laying on the floor unconscious. But before I could step around the corner into the living room, my grandfather stopped me. You don't want to see this. Eilish's parents were dead. They had been stabbed. My grandfather ushered my grandmother to call the police as he headed over to pick up Eilish. I walked behind him, trying not to look at the blood-spilled carpet. Eilish was lying on the floor. In her hand was a bloody knife. I saw the bracelet. Her wrist had become dark and purplish. Was that the one? I was too shocked to speak. I nodded my head. My grandfather wrenched the knife out of her hand. I looked over his shoulder and realized something had been moving under Eilish's skin. It looked like small, moving bumps. I grabbed my stomach tight, trying not to get sick. My grandfather tried to pull the bracelet, but Eilish's hand had swollen. The bracelet wouldn't budge an inch. We have to get help. The police arrived at dawn. And my grandmother took me back home. I couldn't sleep at all that night. That morning, my grandfather told me Eilish was taken to the hospital. Her arm had been amputated. The Dolmen you were at yesterday, do you know what it's called in Irish? No. They call it Polnambron, the Hole of Sadness. Years ago, a group of archaeologists went up there and did an excavation. They found 22 people buried under it. 16 of the bodies were adults and the rest were children. It wasn't wise to disturb the dead. They don't take kindly to those who interrupt their rest. That was the last week of my vacation. The last week of my vacation went by awfully quiet. My grandparents boarded me on my flight back to the US. I was glad to meet my parents again, glad to be back home, safe and sound. But I could never stop thinking about Eilish. Emma. How are you? I'm good, dear. How's everything in Chicago? It's alright. And, what about Eilish? She never recovered. They had to put her in a mental asylum. The police say she went insane and murdered her parents that night. What? That doesn't even make any sense. I tried streaming through articles and newspapers about the incident, but not one mention of the bracelet. I did find the bracelet, however. It was on display in a glass box in an Irish museum, labeled "Do Not Touch."
If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to my channel and share this video with your friends and family.